Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we cut through all that noise, grab the key sources, and really pull out the nuggets you need to get genuinely informed fast. Today we're doing a deep dive into two, well, truly towering figures of the 20th century, Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. We're going to explore their combined impact, which is pretty profound, on the eventual collapse of communism worldwide. So yeah, our mission here is really to unpack the strategies they used. And it wasn't just one thing, was it?
Not at all.
We're talking ideology, military moves, economic pressure, diplomacy. We'll zero in on the specifics from our sources, trying to get at the how and why their efforts together really changed the global map. How did this system finally crumble?
Right. And I think it's crucial right from the start to get that this wasn't really about one big showdown. It was much more of a sustained process, weakening a system from different angles. Their approach really had this unique mix of, well, ideological firmness, a big military buildup, economic squeeze, and some very careful diplomacy. They were definitely playing the long game.
Okay, so let's start there with the foundation, the ideology. What was the core thinking driving their fight against communism?
Well, they both had this incredibly strong, shared opposition on ideological grounds. Reagan famously called the Soviet Union the evil empire.
That was huge.
It really was. It wasn't just talk. It was a direct moral challenge. It basically said, we're not just going to contain you, we're aiming for defeat. And that came from his deep belief that democratic capitalism was just, well, better morally and economically. Thatcher, she was maybe a bit more pragmatic in how she said things, but just as firm underneath. She saw the Soviet Union as this aggressive military power that needed to be contained and strategically weakened wherever possible.
So a really strong tone of moral clarity there, framing it as freedom versus oppression. But what was the actual impact of them presenting such a united, kind of unwavering front like that? Did it backfire at all?
That's a fair question. I mean, there was certainly a risk of escalation, but what the sources seem to suggest is that this clarity actually set a strong moral baseline for the West. It created a shared sense of purpose, signaling that fundamental values weren't up for negotiation. And maybe paradoxically, defining the enemy so clearly also kind of set the terms for any future talks. It meant they could eventually engage, like with Gorbachev,
Right.
but from a position of strength and conviction.
Right. But, okay, words are one thing. How did they translate that resolve into actual military strategy? This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. They pushed a very clear strategy of strength. Reagan initiated this massive military buildup. Part of that was deploying new nuclear missiles in Europe, which really shifted the strategic thinking.
And SDI, the Star Wars Initiative.
Exactly, the Strategic Defense Initiative,
Yeah.
SDI, this idea of a space-based shield against missiles. Now, the key thing here, even just as a concept, SDI was a huge psychological hit to the Soviets. Because it threatened to make their main claim to superpower status, their massive nuclear arsenal, potentially useless.
Yeah.
It pushed them towards a tech race they just couldn't afford or technologically manage, especially given how their economy was structured.
Right, the command economy limitations.
Precisely. That inability to innovate quickly compared to the West. So SDI, plus the overall military spending increase, put this incredible strain on the Soviet economy, an economy already struggling under its own military spending.
Which had always prioritized military over civilian needs.
For decades, leading to crumbling infrastructure and
Yeah.
shortages. And Thatcher was right there with Reagan on this. She supported NATO, crucially allowed the U.S. to place missiles in the UK. It all added up.
So that military pressure, combined with the economic burden, really started to show the cracks in the Soviet system.
Undeniably, it exposed these deep systemic vulnerabilities and forced some really tough choices on the Soviet leadership.
Okay, so it wasn't just military might. They were also using economic tools pretty actively. Can you walk us through that side of things? How did they apply economic pressure?
Yeah, it was definitely a multi-pronged economic strategy. You had Reagan using sanctions, trade restrictions, things like limiting Soviet access to advanced Western tech, especially microchips and finance.
So starving key industries.
Effectively, yes, hindering their ability to modernize both economically and militarily. And then there was the oil price crash in the 80s.
Ah, yes, that was huge for them.
Absolutely devastating. Partly driven by increased U.S. and Saudi production, yes.
Right.
But since oil was their main source of hard currency, that price drop just slashed the funds they needed for everything imports, internal investment. It hit them at the worst possible time.
And Thatcher's role here.
Well, her pro-market policies generally aimed to strengthen Western economies, but she also supported specific initiatives that helped isolate the Soviet economy, making it harder for them to compete or integrate globally. It just reinforced their stagnation.
So you've got these external economic pressures combined with their own internal problems, the inefficiencies of central planning.
Exactly, where meeting quotas often mattered more than quality or actual need. All of this together just fueled significant internal instability across the Soviet bloc.
Makes sense. But beyond the hard power, the military, the economics, there was also this other dimension, wasn't there? This sort of soft power influencing hearts and minds. What stands out there?
Oh, absolutely key. Their soft power game was strong. Reagan, for instance, very openly supported anti-communist groups in Eastern Europe. Think of Solidarity in Poland.
The trade union movement.
That independent union that directly challenged the party. And he also backed dissidents inside the Soviet Union, like Andrei Sakharov, the physicist and human rights advocate.
What did that achieve?
It sent a powerful message of hope. It showed people behind the Iron Curtain, they weren't forgotten, that the West supported their struggle for freedom. And Reagan's public speeches were crucial too.
The Berlin Wall speech.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. In 1987. Iconic. More than just words, it was this powerful symbol of commitment to ending the division, ending Soviet oppression. Sources suggest it really landed, causing unease in Moscow despite their public dismissal.
And Thatcher.
She was perhaps less rhetorical, but played a vital role building that Western consensus, offering diplomatic backing for dissidents. It was that combination, Reagan's strong moral language and Thatcher's steady diplomatic pressure, that sent this really clear signal of unity and resolve. It empowered those pushing for change from within.
So this then raises a really interesting point. After all this pressure, this evil empire talk, how did they actually manage the relationship with Mikhail Gorbachev when he came along? He was different, a reformer.
It's one of the most fascinating aspects, actually. Their engagement with Gorbachev was, well, pivotal and maybe a bit surprising. Reagan and Gorbachev somehow built a personal rapport.
Despite everything.
Despite everything, Reagan showed a willingness to meet him, seriously engage. You had the Geneva Summit in '85, Reykjavik in '86, which nearly got to abolishing nuclear weapons, and then the really crucial one, signing the INF Treaty in 1987.
Which eliminated a whole category of nuclear missiles.
Exactly. A huge step. These meetings, this dialogue, they paved the way for real arms cuts and, importantly, for more openness from the Soviet side glasnost. And here's the irony, isn't it? This cooperation, this engagement, ultimately helped weaken the hardline Soviet control. As the system opened up, its flaws just became more visible, harder to deny.
And Thatcher's view of Gorbachev.
She'd met him earlier, famously saying he was someone we could do business with. She recognized he was genuinely different, willing to negotiate to avoid conflict, so she encouraged his reforms, which helped ease tensions and allowed space for those changes to happen.
Okay, so you have all these pressures building up: ideological, military, economic, diplomatic, and then this engagement with a reformer. How did it all finally come to a head? What was the tipping point?
Well, by the late 80s, the cumulative effect of all this pressure, Reagan's strategies, Thatcher's consistent diplomatic backing, it created this atmosphere, this political space where the countries in Eastern Europe just felt emboldened. They felt they could finally break free from Moscow's control.
And then the Berlin Wall came down.
November 1989. A truly electrifying moment. And you can draw a direct line from the policies and the sustained pressure applied by Reagan and Thatcher to that event. Reagan's unwavering stance, his rhetoric, combined with Thatcher's, maybe more cautious, but firm support for German reunification, which was a very sensitive topic. It gave East Germans and others the confidence to act. It forced the Soviets' hand.
And the whole bloc started to crumble.
The Warsaw Pact just unraveled. Those regimes fell, as they said, like dominoes. And the final act, of course, was the collapse of the Soviet Union itself in 1991.
A monumental outcome.
Absolutely. And it underscores that it wasn't one single blow, but this sustained, multifaceted pressure cooker ideology, military economy, diplomacy that weakened the system until it just couldn't hold anymore. It was effectively the ideological and political end of communism as a global force, completely reshaping the world order.
So just to quickly recap for everyone listening, we've seen how from Reagan's evil empire framing to Thatcher's pragmatic resolve, from the military buildup and SDI to the economic squeeze through sanctions and oil prices, and finally that complex dance of diplomacy with Gorbachev, Reagan, and Thatcher together applied this relentless multi-layered pressure that was instrumental in the fall of communism.
And perhaps a final thought for you to mull over as you continue your own deep dives into this era. Considering all these different angles, the ideological fight, the military strategy, the economic warfare, the diplomacy, even the soft power, which of those elements do you think ultimately packed the biggest punch? Was it the economic strain, the moral challenge, the military threat, something to think about.